Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. I'm your host, Adam Horner. With 30 years in the industry, including over a decade as a CTO, I have coached and mentored more than 100 engineers and tech leaders. This podcast covers crucial topics for CTOs, providing insights, strategies, and practical advice to help you build and refine your own playbook to excel in your role. Today, I'm going to talk about getting into and successfully staying in your first CTO role, a journey I call crossing the CTO chasm. I'll outline a broad playbook that you can take and adapt into your own journey, one that I've distilled from helping many CTOs in their attempts to cross the CTO chasm. If you enjoy this episode and want to connect with like-minded CTOs on the same journey to share experiences, encouragement, tips, and techniques, then join the CTO Playbook community at snova.tech/podcast. The link will be in the show notes. Let's start then with the inspiration behind the term, the CTO chasm, and why it's so relevant to your career progression. I've cheekily borrowed the name of this episode from Geoffrey Moore's well-known book, Crossing the Chasm, which was originally published in 1991. For those unfamiliar with it, Moore's book explores the challenge of achieving market adoption, navigating the elusive product-market fit, and the infamous bell curve of market distribution, the law of diffusion of innovation. The curve is divided into 5 sections. The first 2 are going to lump together into one, which is innovators and early adopters. They're the enthusiasts who embrace new technology at every turn, comprising about 16% of the market. On the opposite end, we have laggards, those who could still be using Betamax video cassettes if they could, loyal to their vinyl records and cassette tapes even today. In between these groups lie the early majority and the late majority. The chasm that Moore describes is the leap from the early adopters to the early majority. It's a daunting gap that explains why a 10% market share is relatively easy to achieve and not really worth writing home about. But expanding beyond that is where the true challenge lies. So how does this concept apply to your journey as a CTO? And what does crossing the CTO chasm actually mean? This is the transition from being a team leader, a technical leader, or a CTO of a single team to becoming a manager-type CTO. If you've listened to my previous episode, this is the leap from step 2, the expert CTO, to step 3, the manager-type CTO, in the CTO growth cycle. To illustrate it, consider this. There are many engineering leaders and single-team CTOs, but relatively few ascend to become CTOs who lead multiple teams. This chasm is the barrier that they struggle to cross. Statistically, only a few CTOs will ever make it across, and not all who do will remain in the role without experiencing failure. The transition might be common, but incredibly challenging. It's one of the toughest because it requires overcoming multiple simultaneous obstacles, which can quickly become overwhelming. Ironically, the very people cheering you on might also be holding you back, not intentionally, but their influence is still a hindrance. For example, I once coached a CTO who was a brilliant engineer, but he constantly found himself pulled back into technical details by his team. They relied on him because he was so good at what he did. But this reliance held him back from stepping into his strategic role. It wasn't until he started consciously stepping back and empowering his team to make decisions that he could break free from the daily grind and focus on the bigger picture. Now that we understand what the CTO chasm is, let's explore the challenges you'll face in crossing it and why these challenges are so daunting. As a team leader or single team CTO, you're likely working in the machine rather than on the machine. You're deeply involved in the day-to-day tasks, reviewing, guiding, and assisting with technical challenges. It's what got you here, and it feels impactful. At this stage, you might get by with minimal reporting to the executive team. They probably don't yet see you as someone who can help beyond technology, so their requests stay in your domain. Meanwhile, critical tasks like team building, recruiting, and defining culture happen sporadically, often without the attention that they really deserve. You might also find yourself overlooking business finances and key metrics. Up until now, expectations are centered around your technical contributions, not your financial acumen. And this oversight can trap you into leaving financial considerations until the year end or bonus time. Similarly, information security might have been more of a checkbox than an integral part of risk management. It's likely been someone else's concern, with your involvement being minimal. Yet while your technical responsibilities grow, so do your challenges. More people, more technical issues, more pressure. Parkinson's law kicks in, and the work expands to fill the time available. Soon you're overwhelmed, and your team still relies on you for what you've always been good at. But to cross the CTO chasm, you must think differently. The skills and behaviors, the knowledge and experience that got you here won't get you where you need to go. What got you here won't get you there. And yes, that's a nod to Marshall Goldsmith's famous book. So how do you actually make this transition? Here's a playbook of 5 essential steps to help you cross the CTO chasm. No 2 CTOs that I've coached have followed the same path. Your strengths, your organization's needs, and your circumstances will shape your journey. However, there are patterns to the common steps that many successful CTOs have followed, which you can adapt to your own situation. Let's go through them. Number 1, free up your time. It is almost impossible to think strategically if your time is constantly interrupted. We know this instinctively as engineers. Interrupts in hardware are expensive and cost clock cycles. Interrupting software engineers causes a context switch that costs a minimum of 15 minutes each time. Yet, as engineering leaders, we too easily forget this as we strive to keep all parts of the team running smoothly, mistakenly thinking that the cost on ourselves is minimal. As a strategic leader, you need to regain that focus. There are a few techniques, but they all revolve around your calendar. Back out of meetings you don't really need to be in. Do you need to attend every stand-up? Question all of your other group meetings carefully too. Perhaps you only need to attend alternate weeks. Put focus time in your diary. One of the CTOs I coached started using this technique of using focus time. It's basically a meeting with yourself, and it gives you the time to get things done without interruptions or context switches. Not even from email, no Slack, no Teams. Remember, you own your own calendar. No one else does. It's one of the few areas of corporate life where you have complete autonomy. So make sure you are using it wisely and not letting others dictate your schedule, however unwitting or however good intentioned that might be. Number 2, make fewer decisions. For every decision that's put upon you, a corresponding burden of research, understanding, commitment, and memory is also placed upon you. This can create anything from an intoxicating sense of power and control to the dread of yet another squabble to settle, with a huge range of emotions in between. All of these give you the feeling of being needed, and that is the hardest part to let go of. But you must learn to let go of that. Delegate much more of your decision-making. Coach your team leaders to debate with each other without your involvement. To one of my teams, I gave them all a copy of David L. Marquette's excellent short book, Turn the Ship Around. My advice to most of the CTOs I coach often comes down to this. Delegate until the point of discomfort, and then delegate some more. The point, by the way, of the Turn the Ship Around book is to get your people to say to you, I intend to X, rather than, how do I do Y? Or should we do A or B? Once you started delegating, it'll make your life a lot easier. Your team will learn and level up quickly, and so will you. Most importantly, you'll free up your headspace from all those decisions. I really love the Steve Jobs quote, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do. Number 3, adopt a learning mindset. You're stepping into a new role, one you haven't really done before, one you haven't probably trained for, and one where you will likely feel out of your depth. If you were to hire a junior engineer with just 2 weeks of PHP experience, a month of Java training on top of their 7-week React bootcamp, Would you expect them to know everything they need to do the job? Or would you plan on training them, mentoring them, and giving them the experience that they learn as they work? As you move into your executive role without an MBA, with little experience of leading leaders, and not knowing your balance sheet from the forecast, you've got to realize that there are many areas and topics that you need to learn. Configure your time, your approach, your attitude accordingly. The rest of the executive team want you to succeed, and they will help you if you have the right approach and the right mindset. Set yourself up for success by embracing continuous learning. Number 4, talking of the executive team, spend time in your first team. This concept, best articulated by Patrick Lencioni and actually described really well by Andy Skipper on a previous episode, is that you must prioritize the team you are a member of over the teams that you lead. In most cases, as a CTO, you're a member of the C-suite or the executive leadership team. This means that for probably the first time in your career, you'll be spending a lot of your time with people in completely different disciplines: sales, operations, finance, HR, or people in culture, which is a better name for it, I think, marketing, strategy. You need to learn the basics of several roles that you've had probably very little need to understand deeply up until now. Remember step 3, adopting the learning mindset? This is one of the key areas to start learning about. You also need to build rapport, trust, and good working relationships with the other leaders in your first team, which means spending time with them, and inevitably with some of their team members. Remember step 1, freeing up your time? This is an area where you're going to invest some of that time you've freed up. Step 5, get multilingual. This isn't about learning a new programming language, nor is it about learning a new spoken language. You need to learn the language of the business and, if necessary, the language of your first team. The language in C-suites and executive leadership teams is different. The terms, the priorities, and the concepts all revolve around money instead of technology. If you report elsewhere in the org chart, and sometimes the CEO can be an example of that, in other organizations it might be the CIO, there may be a different dialect to learn, but money will always be the common aspect of the language. In some industries and organizations, there is also domain-specific language to learn too. For example, I worked in real estate marketing for 5 years, where there were a whole set of terms and concepts to pick up that were particular to that industry and its history. Translation is another important aspect of knowing multiple languages. At first, your translations may be literal and full of, poorly translated idioms, but there is a shortcut that mostly holds true across industries, and that is analogies. If you can find great analogies between concepts, you can convey quite complex ideas to a team without them needing to know all the jargon and underlying concepts. For example, in explaining why it is non-trivial to switch cloud providers for the technology infrastructure, you might translate that with the analogy of it's like trying to change the chassis on a school bus on short notice. We aren't sure if the wheels will fit afterwards, and even if they do, the steering might get stuck and not work properly. As you can see, crossing the CTO chasm requires a shift in mindset, strategy, and approach. But what's the payoff for making this leap? Let's wrap up by highlighting the positive benefits that await on the other side. Most promotions build on your existing knowledge, taking you to a level where the impact of your decisions is bigger by about 50%. But the leap to a manager CTO role is different. Your previous knowledge might account for just 20% of what you need, and you'll take decisions with huge impact and huge considerations, where huge probably means more than 10 times bigger. To cope with that, the 5 steps in the playbook are 1, free up your time. 2, make fewer technical decisions. 3, adopt a learning mindset. 4, spend time in your first team, not with the people that you lead. And number 5, learn the languages of your business. The CTOs and CPTOs that I've coached the most successfully have followed this model and have done a variant of each of these steps. There are CTOs that I've coached who haven't managed to cross the CTO chasm and stick the landing so that they stay there. And they've either decided that they didn't want to do one or more of those steps or found that they were unable to do one or more of those steps. I have to add that it wasn't always entirely their fault either. So it is important to have your eyes and ears open to the forces of entropy and chaos that will stand in the way of your path to success. For example, I had one scenario where operations teams were so used to funneling all bugs through the CTO herself that it was immensely difficult for her to change that habit built up over years and escape that trap. But here's the positive benefit. When you do cross the CTO chasm, you position yourself not just as a leader of technology, but as a leader of the business. You gain the ability to influence the broader strategy, drive meaningful change across the organization, and truly shape the future of your company and yourself. It's a challenging journey, but the rewards on the other side are immense. So, are you ready to leap across the CTO chasm and stick the landing? Until next time, stay innovative and keep leading with impact. Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.